Imagine being abandoned in a nursing home on Christmas Eve, left behind like an old piece of furniture. For 6 long years, Evelyn Mercer waited, wondering if her family would ever come back. But when they finally did, they weren't alone. And what they brought with them would change everything. Before we dive into this emotional journey, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. Stories like this remind us of the power of resilience, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The coldest Christmas Eve. The snow fell in thick, silent waves outside Maplewood Nursing Home, blanketing the small Vermont town in a hush that felt almost sacred. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly, casting a sterile glow over the tinsel-draped hallways. Christmas music played faintly from a radio in the nurse's station, a cheerful melody that did nothing to warm the chill in Evelyn Mercer's bones. She sat by the window in the common room, her fingers tracing the fog her breath left on the glass. The ugly Christmas sweater they dressed her in, a reindeer with a blinking red nose, itched against her skin, but she didn't bother adjusting it. What did it matter? No one was coming to see her anyway. 6 years. 6 long years since the accident that took Henry, her husband of 42 years. 6 years since her son, David, had looked at her with something worse than grief, something like resentment. If you hadn't asked Dad to pick up your medication that night, he'd still be here. The words had hung between them ever since, unspoken but heavy in every glance, every strained conversation. And now, another Christmas Eve alone. The nurses had tried to soften the blow. Maybe they're just running late, Evelyn. The roads are bad. But she knew better. David hadn't visited in months. His wife, Laura, had stopped sending cards. Even her grandchildren, once so eager to clamber onto her lap and beg for stories, had grown distant, their voices on the phone polite but hollow. A lump formed in her throat as she watched the parking lot. Empty, save for the staff's cars. No minivan with the dented bumper, the one David always refused to fix. No headlights cutting through the snowfall. They're not coming. The realization settled over her like the snow outside, quiet, inevitable. She let out a slow breath, her reflection in the glass wavering. How had it come to this? She'd raised David on her own after Henry's death, scraping together every penny to keep him in college. She'd held him when his first marriage fell apart. And now? Now she was just another forgotten soul in a place where time moved differently, where days blurred together until even the holidays lost their meaning. A sudden burst of laughter made her turn. 2 aides were hanging paper snowflakes near the doorway, giggling over some shared joke. One of them, Marta, the kind one with the braid, caught Evelyn's eye and offered a sympathetic smile. "You okay, Mrs. Mercer?" Evelyn forced a nod. "Just waiting." Marta hesitated, then crossed the room, lowering her voice. "I checked the log. No visitors are scheduled for you today." The words shouldn't have stung. But they did. Evelyn's hands curled into fists in her lap, her wedding band digging into her skin. "I see." Marta squeezed her shoulder. "We've got hot cocoa in the kitchen. Let me get you some?" Before Evelyn could answer, the front desk phone rang. Marta hurried off, leaving her alone again with the quiet and the snow and the crushing weight of abandonment. She closed her eyes. "Henry, I miss you." A sudden commotion at the entrance made her look up. A nurse, new, someone Evelyn didn't recognize, was striding toward her, an envelope in hand. "Mrs. Mercer?" The nurse's voice was hesitant. "This was just dropped off for you." Evelyn's heart lurched. "David?" Her fingers trembled as she took the envelope. No return address. Just her name in shaky handwriting. She tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No card. No holiday wishes. Just a few typed lines that made the room tilt around her. Mom, we can't do this anymore. The medical bills, the guilt, it's too much. We've signed over guardianship to Maplewood. We're so sorry. No signature. No explanation. Just an ending. The paper slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor like the snow outside, soft, silent, and utterly final. Somewhere down the hall, the radio played Silent Night. Evelyn Mercer sat very still, staring at the empty parking lot, and wondered how a heart could break so quietly. The letter that changed everything. The envelope lay discarded on the floor, a stark white against the faded linoleum. Evelyn stared at it, her breath shallow, as if the air had been punched from her lungs. The words on that single sheet of paper echoed in her mind, sharp and unrelenting. We can't do this anymore. The nurses had tried to speak to her, their voices gentle but probing, but Evelyn had only shaken her head and turned away. What was there to say? Her family, her own son, had signed her away like a burden they could no longer carry. The days that followed blurred together. Christmas came and went, marked only by the plastic tree in the common room and the overcooked turkey served in the dining hall. Evelyn moved through the motions, her body present but her spirit hollowed out. She ate when reminded, slept when exhaustion forced her to, but the world had taken on a muted quality, as if she were watching it from behind thick glass. Then, one afternoon in early January, a new resident arrived. Walter Hargrove was a tall man with a shock of white hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He walked with a cane, his left leg stiff from what he later explained was a stroke, but his voice was steady, his mind still quick. He had been a lawyer once, decades ago, before age and failing health had landed him in Maplewood. Their first meeting was unremarkable. Evelyn sat in her usual chair by the window, a book open but unread in her lap, when Walter lowered himself into the seat beside her with a grunt. You've been staring at that same page for 20 minutes, he remarked. Evelyn blinked, startled out of her thoughts. Excuse me? The book. He nodded toward it. You haven't turned a single page. She closed it with a sigh. I suppose I wasn't really reading. Walter studied her for a long moment, then extended a hand. Walter Hargrove. Reluctantly, she shook it. Evelyn Mercer. Pleasure, Evelyn. His grip was firm, his palm warm. You've got the look of someone carrying a weight too heavy to put down. She almost laughed at that. You could say that. He didn't press further, and for that, she was grateful. Instead, he pulled a chessboard from the bag at his feet. Play? Evelyn hadn't played chess in years, not since Henry was alive. But something in Walter's steady gaze made her nod. They played in silence at first, the only sound the soft click of pieces moving across the board. Walter was good, his strategies patient and deliberate, but Evelyn found herself remembering old tricks, slipping back into the rhythm of the game. After 3 matches, she lost 2-1-1, Walter leaned back in his chair. You're sharper than you let on. I used to play with my husband, she admitted. Used to? He's gone. Walter nodded, as if he'd already guessed. And your children? The question was casual, but Evelyn's fingers tightened around the pawn in her hand. I don't have any. The lie came easily, coated in bitterness. Walter's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't call her on it. Instead, he moved his bishop, putting her king in check. Your turn. Over the next few weeks, chess with Walter became a ritual. They played every afternoon, sometimes talking, sometimes not. He told her about his career, the cases he'd won and lost, the years he'd spent fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Evelyn listened, but she rarely offered much about herself in return. Then, one rainy Tuesday, everything changed. They were midway through a game when Walter set down his coffee cup and said, "You know, Evelyn, I couldn't help but notice something." "Oh. You never get any mail." The observation was so simple, so innocuous, that it took Evelyn a moment to process. Then the truth of it settled over her, cold and heavy. No letters. No cards. No phone calls. "No," she said quietly. "I don't." Walter studied her, his gaze piercing. "You said you didn't have children. But that's not true, is it?" Evelyn's throat tightened. She could have lied again. She could have brushed him off. But something in Walter's eyes, the quiet understanding, the lack of pity, made the words spill out before she could stop them. "I have a son." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "He left me here. On Christmas Eve." Walter didn't react with shock or platitudes. He simply nodded, as if this, too, was something he'd already guessed. "Did he sign anything when he brought you here?" The question caught her off guard. I don't know. There were papers. I didn't really read them." Walter's expression darkened. "Evelyn, do you still own your house?" "Of course she stopped." Did she? The house she and Henry had bought 40 years ago, the one she'd raised David in, was it still hers? She'd assumed so, but now, doubt crept in. Walter leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "I think you need to find out exactly what you signed." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "Why?" "Because," Walter said slowly, "if I had to guess, your son didn't just leave you here." He let the words hang between them, heavy with implication. "He stole from you." The truth unfolds. The chessboard sat forgotten between them, the pieces frozen mid-game. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she pressed them flat against the table, as if steadying herself against the weight of Walter's words. Stole from me? The idea was absurd. David had been distant, yes. Cold, even. But a thief? Her own son? Walter didn't flinch. "I've seen it before." Elderly parents, vulnerable, trusting, perfect targets for financial exploitation. He tapped his cane against the floor for emphasis. Guardianship papers can be used to transfer assets. Houses. Savings. All under the guise of helping. Evelyn's mind raced. She thought of the hurried signatures, the way David had slid papers toward her after Henry's funeral, murmuring about just some legal formalities. She'd trusted him. Signed without reading. But why wouldn't he just ask? Her voice sounded small, even to herself. If he needed money. Because asking would mean admitting what he was doing, Walter cut in. This way, he could tell himself he was just handling things for you. No guilt that way. A bitter taste filled Evelyn's mouth. She thought of the last time she'd seen David, 6 months before the nursing home. He'd been in her kitchen, rifling through her filing cabinet. "Just updating your records, Mom," he'd said when she'd asked. Had he been looking for the deed then? Walter leaned forward. "Evelyn, do you have any copies of the papers you signed?" She shook her head. "David took everything. Then we start with the county records." Walter reached into his sweater pocket and pulled out a small notepad. "Give me your address. I still have a few contacts at the courthouse." For the first time in years, Evelyn felt something stir inside her, not quite hope, but the faint spark of defiance. The next week passed in a haze of whispered conversations and clandestine phone calls. Walter would will himself to the payphone near the nurse's station. He refused to trust the facility's line, muttering about ears everywhere, and return with scribbled notes. Evelyn watched him from their usual table, her stomach twisting with each new detail. On Thursday, he came back with a grim expression. "It's worse than I thought," he said, sliding into the chair beside her. "The house was transferred to David and Laura 3 years ago. Not sold, just put in their names." Evelyn's vision swam. That house had been her last tether to Henry. The porch where they drank lemonade on summer nights. The kitchen where she taught David to bake apple pies. Now it belonged to the people who'd discarded her like yesterday's newspaper. "There's more," Walter said quietly. "Your savings account was emptied 2 months before you came here." The numbers flashed in Evelyn's mind, $87,000. Henry's life insurance. Their retirement fund. Gone. A hot tear slipped down her cheek. "That money was for my grandchildren's education." Walter's jaw tightened. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his own, his skin papery but warm. "We're not done yet." That night, Evelyn lay awake staring at the ceiling, the hum of the oxygen machine down the hall a constant were in the background. The truth should have crushed her. Instead, it lit a fire in her chest she hadn't felt since Henry's death. At breakfast the next morning, she pushed her oatmeal aside and met Walter's eyes. "What do we do now?" Walter smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Now," he said, "we fight back." He unfolded a sheet of paper covered in his neat handwriting. "First, we petition for a review of the guardianship. My old partner, Jim Whitaker, still practices elder law. He'll help." But Evelyn hesitated. "I can't pay a lawyer." "Pro bono," Walter said firmly. "Jim owes me more favors than he can count." As he outlined their next steps, court filings, medical evaluations to prove her competence, possibly even criminal charges, Evelyn felt something shift inside her. The fog of resignation that had clouded her mind for years began to lift. Then Marta appeared at their table, her usual cheerful expression replaced with concern. "Mrs. Mercer? Your son is here." The spoon clattered from Evelyn's hand. David hadn't visited in over a year. "Why now?" Walter's eyes narrowed. "Did he say why?" Marta shifted uncomfortably. "Something about property taxes?" Evelyn and Walter exchanged a glance. This wasn't a visit. This was a reckoning. The knock on the door. The dining room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Evelyn's pulse roared in her ears as Marta's words echoed. "Your son is here." David hadn't stepped foot in Maplewood since the day he'd abandoned her. Now he appeared unannounced, asking about property taxes? It couldn't be coincidence. Walter's investigation had stirred something. Walter's hand closed around her wrist. "Breathe, Evelyn. This changes nothing." His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "Remember, the house is yours in every way that matters." She nodded, straightening her sweater with trembling fingers. Across the room, the double doors swung open. David looked older than she remembered. His once dark hair was streaked with gray, his expensive wool coat straining at the middle. When his eyes met hers, she saw it immediately, the flicker of guilt, quickly smothered by practiced concern. "Mom." He approached with outstretched arms. "Merry Christmas." The words hit like a slap. Christmas was still weeks away. This was performance, nothing more. Evelyn remained seated, her voice surprisingly steady. "You haven't called in 11 months, David." A shadow crossed his face. Behind him, Laura hovered near the door, clutching a designer purse like a shield. A stranger in a suit lingered just outside the lawyer, no doubt. David cleared his throat. We need to talk about the house. The tax assessments came, and his eyes darted to Walter. Maybe we should speak privately? Walter's cane thumped against the floor. Anything you have to say can be said in front of me, son. The endearment was deliberate, barbed. David's jaw tightened. Fine. He pulled out a chair, the legs scraping loudly. The town reassessed property values. The taxes on your house have tripled. We can't afford. Evelyn's teacup clattered against its saucer. My house. A beat of silence. Then the stranger stepped forward, extending a business card. Mrs. Mercer, I'm Andrew Price. I represent your family's interests. Walter snorted. Interests being the key word. Price ignored him, placing a document on the table. Given your circumstances, your family is prepared to make you a generous offer. Sign over full ownership, and they'll cover your nursing home costs indefinitely. Evelyn stared at the paper, the legal jargon swimming before her eyes. But one phrase stood out clear as day: quitclaim deed. Walter's fingers dug into her arm. Don't touch that. David leaned forward. Mom, be reasonable. You'll never live there again. This way, the house stays in the family. Something inside Evelyn snapped. The family? Her voice shook with decades of suppressed hurt. You left me here on Christmas Eve, David. You stole my home, my savings, my dignity. And now you want my blessing? Laura made a strangled noise. Evelyn, that's not enough. Evelyn pushed to her feet, her knees protesting but holding firm. Walter? He was already reaching into his jacket, producing an envelope stamped with a court seal. Petition to overturn the fraudulent guardianship. Medical affidavits proving Evelyn's competency. And he dropped a key onto the table with a metallic clink. An order freezing all transactions on the property pending investigation. David paled. You can't. The hell I can't. Walter's grin was all teeth. Turns out forging signatures is still illegal in Vermont. Price was already backing toward the door, but Laura stood frozen, her eyes glistening. Evelyn, we never meant. The apology died as Evelyn lifted her chin. Get out. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then David grabbed the unsigned papers and stormed out, his wife and lawyer scrambling after him. The doors swung shut behind them with finality. Silence. Then Walter exhaled loudly. Well, that could have gone worse. Evelyn sank back into her chair, her whole body trembling. The anger drained away, leaving something quieter in its wake, not quite peace, but possibility. You were magnificent, Walter murmured, squeezing her hand. Outside, snow began to fall, painting the world in fresh white. Somewhere beyond those walls, a house stood waiting. Her house. And for the first time in 6 years, Evelyn Mercer allowed herself to imagine going home. If this story of betrayal and courage moved you, do us a favor, hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful human dramas, and share in the comments, what would you have done in Evelyn's place? Your support helps us tell more stories that matter.